The city was loud, full of life, yet somewhere in its forgotten corners. She moved like a shadow unseen, unheard, unnoticed. The girl had no place to call home. Her days blended into nights, her nights into endless silence, broken pieces of her life clung to her like dust she could never shake off. She carried no name, at least not one she remembered, and no family waited for her. All she had were stray dogs, wild and untamed, that wandered the alleyways. Somehow they accepted her. Somehow they understood the pain that humans could not. In the dark alleys, she found a strange kind of safety. The dogs growled at strangers who came too close, circled her when she slept, and pressed their warm bodies against hers in the bitter cold. People who passed by sometimes glanced at her, sometimes whispered, but most turned their heads away as if she was invisible. Maybe she wanted it that way. She was too broken to ask for kindness, too tired to beg for mercy. Each day was about surviving the next hour, the next minute, the next heartbeat. But even in her silence, there was a story. Deep inside her eyes lived something haunting, a weight heavier than the hunger in her stomach. There were flashes in her mind, memories that didn't make sense. Bright lights, screams, a crash, a moment of fire, then darkness. Every time she tried to hold on to those images, they slipped away, leaving her gasping. She never spoke about them, never told anyone, because there was no one to listen. The dogs were her only family, her only witnesses. She learned to move with them, like one of them. She crawled into broken buildings when the storms came. She drank from rusty pipes and shared scraps of food she found in trash bins. Body ached when her heart screamed in loneliness. She pressed her face into the fur of the oldest dog, a scarred, limping creature with cloudy eyes, and let herself believe, for a moment, that she wasn't alone. Yet, even shadows cannot stay hidden forever. There were nights when she felt eyes on her, not just the usual stares of passers-by, but sharper, heavier, almost searching. She couldn't tell if it was danger or something else. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps following her, echoing through the alleys, long after she had stopped moving. Fear and curiosity tangled inside her chest, but she never let herself slow down. To be caught was to be trapped, and she had sworn without knowing why that she would never be trapped again. The city had 1,000 secrets, but she was one of the darkest. To the world, she was nothing, a broken girl with no name, no voice, and no place. Yet fate had already begun weaving something she could not see, because soon a stranger was going to find her. Someone who would not look away, someone who would not fear the dogs, someone who would change everything she thought she knew about living in the shadows. And in that moment, the life she thought was nothing but silence would collide with something. She had long forgotten love, hope, and the danger that came with both. The city streets were always moving, always buzzing with footsteps, cars, and hurried conversations. But he noticed her where no one else did. At first, she was just a flicker in the corner of his vision, a thin girl crouched among stray dogs, her tangled hair falling across her face, her hands gripping a crust of bread as if it were treasure. Most people looked past her, their eyes sliding away with practiced indifference. But he didn't. Something about her stilled him, made him pause in a way he hadn't in years. He stood across the street that night, watching her in silence. The girl looked more like a shadow than a person, sitting against the crumbling wall of an abandoned shop. The dogs pressed against her sides, their yellow eyes glowing in the dim streetlight. She didn't move with fear when they growled at anyone who came close. No, she sat calmly among them, like she belonged there, like she was one of them. The sight sent a strange ache through his chest. For days after that, he kept returning. He didn't mean to, but something pulled him back, again and again, as if he had to see her to remind himself she was real. She never noticed him at first. She was always focused on surviving, digging through garbage bins, sneaking scraps of food, feeding the dogs before herself. He admired that, though it broke him too. Her body was fragile, too thin, her movements tired, yet her eyes... The streetlight caught them just right. He saw something fierce inside her, a fire that had refused to die, One evening he dared to step closer. His shoes crunched softly against the gravel, and instantly the dogs rose to their feet. Their growls rumbled like thunder, sharp teeth flashing. The girl lifted her head, her eyes locking on him. For a moment, time froze. He thought she might scream or run. Instead, she simply stared, unblinking, her face hidden behind a curtain of tangled hair. There was no fear in her gaze, only warning. It was as if she was silently telling him, "You don't belong here. Go away." But he didn't move. He lifted his hands slowly, palms open, showing he carried nothing. His voice, quiet and steady, broke the silence. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl's expression didn't change. She said nothing. The dogs snarled louder, circling, her ready to protect. Still, she didn't tell them to attack. She didn't speak at all. He realized then that maybe she couldn't, or maybe she had, forgotten how. He placed something on the ground between them, a sandwich wrapped in paper. He took one slow step back. The dog sniffed the air, tense, suspicious. But the girl's eyes flickered to the food, then back to him, studying his face. He waited, heart pounding. Finally, she leaned forward and snatched it up, retreating quickly as if afraid he might change his mind. She didn't thank him. She just tore into the sandwich with shaking hands, breaking off pieces to feed the dogs first before taking a bite for herself. That moment carved itself into him. He walked away without another word, but he knew he'd return. Something in her silence had spoken louder than anything he had ever heard. Night after night, he came back. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes water, sometimes just stood at a distance. Slowly, her eyes began to soften when she saw him. The dogs still watched him warily, but they no longer growled as fiercely. The oldest one, with a scar across its muzzle, even let him stand a little closer. And though she still hadn't spoken, though she still kept her distance, he felt a shift in the air. A fragile thread forming between them, thin but unbreakable. He didn't know her story. He didn't know her name. But he knew this. She was not meant to stay in the shadows forever. Something inside him told him that meeting her was not an accident. And deep down, he sensed that she had been waiting, though she didn't know it, for someone who would not look away. What neither of them realized was that this fragile connection, born in silence and fear, was about to change both their lives. Forever. Because the world that had abandoned her was about to notice her again. Not all eyes watching her carried kindness. The rain had returned that night, pouring hard against the cracked pavement, washing dirt into the gutters where the girl and her dogs huddled for shelter. She sat curled beneath a torn sheet of plastic, her knees drawn to her chest, her thin frame trembling from the cold. The dogs pressed close, their bodies forming a barrier around her, his eyes glowing in the darkness. Across the street, he stood once again, his coat pulled tight, watching her. He had told himself 100 times to walk away, to stop coming back. But his feet betrayed him. He couldn't leave her. Something about her, fragile yet unbroken, silent yet unyielding, kept him tethered. He didn't just see a girl in the shadows anymore. He saw someone fighting to exist in a world that had already decided she shouldn't. But that night was different. That night, he wasn't the only one watching. The sound of heavy boots echoed down the alley, rough laughter cutting through the rainfall. 3 men appeared, their steps careless, their voices loud. They weren't strangers to the streets. He could tell by the way they moved, like predators who already knew the territory was theirs. The girl stiffened instantly, her hand tightening on the nearest dog's fur. The animals growled low, their hackles rising. The men noticed her. Of them stopped, grinning through broken teeth. "Well, look what we got here," he sneered, his words slurred from drink. "A little ghost girl hiding with her mutts." The girl didn't move. She kept her eyes low, but her body trembled as the men drew closer. The dogs snapped their jaws, their warning clear. But the men only laughed. "She don't belong out here alone," another said, his voice mocking. "Someone should take care of her." His hand reached out, fingers stretching toward her tangled hair, before he even realized what he was doing.
Oh.
The watcher, The man who had been standing across the street all these nights stepped forward. His voice rang out, sharp and firm. "Leave her alone." The three men froze, then turned their heads toward him. Their laughter faded into something colder. The leader tilted his head, sizing him up. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Her guardian angel." He spat into the gutter, then took a step closer to the girl. He found her first. The dogs lunged, barking furiously, their snarls echoing through the alley. The girl clung to them, her eyes darting between the men and the stranger who had spoken. She didn't move, but he saw something flash in her gaze: fear. Yes, but also trust. Silent plea. He took another step forward, his fists clenched. "I won't say it again. Leave her." The tension snapped like a wire. One of the men lunged at him, swinging a wild punch. He ducked, his own fist slamming into the man's jaw with a crack that echoed louder than the thunder above. The second rushed in, but the dogs were faster. They leaped at him, teeth sinking into his arm, dragging him back with snarls that drowned out his screams. The leader hesitated, caught between fight and retreat. His eyes flicked to the girl, then back to the man standing between them. Something in the stranger's stance, the calm, the refusal to step aside, made him curse under his breath. "Not worth it," he spat, grabbing his wounded companion. "She ain't worth it." Stumbled back into the rain, disappearing into the shadows they had crawled from. The alley fell silent again, except for the growls of the dogs and the pounding of his heart. He turned toward her slowly. The girl hadn't moved, her small hands still gripping the dog's fur. Her eyes, those fierce, haunted eyes, were locked on him. Met for a moment, neither spoke. Then, without a word, she reached out and pushed the plastic sheet aside, as if silently inviting him into her small circle of shelter. He stepped forward, the rain soaking his shoulders, and crouched beside her. The dogs didn't growl this time. They only watched, as if deciding. And in that moment, as thunder rolled above them, he realized the shadows that had kept her hidden were no longer hers alone. The night was quieter than most. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening beneath the pale glow of broken lamps. The city smelled of damp earth and rust, every corner whispering of forgotten lives. He sat with her beneath the plastic sheet, their silence stretching like a fragile thread. The dogs had curled up around her again, protective and restless, their ears twitching at every distant sound. He wanted to speak, to ask her name, to tell her she wasn't alone anymore. But he didn't. He had learned enough to know words were. Heavy things in hers had been buried for a long time. Then she surprised him. It wasn't much. It's just a sound horse, uncertain, like a rusty lock being turned for the first time in years. At first he thought he had imagined it, but when he looked at her, he saw her lips moving. She was whispering. The dogs lifted their heads, as if even they had noticed something extraordinary. "Why?" she said. He blinked, stunned. It was the first word she had given him, the first crack in the wall she had built around herself. "Why? What?" he asked softly, afraid that if he spoke too loud, she might vanish back into silence. Her eyes flicked to him, then away, as though the question itself was too dangerous to repeat. But she tried again, her voice steadier this time. "Why? Help me." The question cut deeper than he expected. Looked at Hurley. Looked. Her hollow cheeks, her tangled hair, the dirt smeared across her skin. She was a ghost of a child, surviving in a world that had already turned its back on her. And still, in her voice, he heard not gratitude, but suspicion. Distrust. A wound left by someone who had already betrayed her once. "Because no one else will," he answered finally. The words came out low, almost a vow. She stared at him for a long time, her eyes unreadable. Then she looked down at her hands, fingers twisting the frayed edge of her sleeve. He thought she might close herself off again, sink back into silence. But instead, she whispered something else, something that made his chest tighten. "They come back," his breath caught. "The men?" She nodded once. Her dogs pressed closer, as if they too remembered. "They come back, always," he felt. A chill creeped through him. Those men hadn't been random. They had known where to find her, had been looking. If they had come once, they would come again. He leaned closer, his voice steady. Not while I'm here. The dogs lifted their heads again, watching him carefully, as if weighing the truth of his words. The girl, however, gave no sign of belief or doubt. She only stared into the darkness of the alley, her shoulders tight, her body small against the vastness of the night. Then, faintly, he heard the echo of footsteps. Distant, but deliberate. Not laughter this time. Not drunk. He froze, straining to listen. The girl's eyes snapped to him, wide and alert. The dogs growled, their ears flattening against their skulls. Someone was coming. The moment stretched, heavy with dread. He rose slowly to his feet, his heart pounding, and stepped out. From under the torn sheet of plastic, the street ahead looked empty, but the echo of boots against wet pavement kept drawing closer. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They weren't hiding. He looked back at her, at the girl in the shadows who had finally spoken, and saw fear flicker across her face. She wasn't afraid of the dark or the cold. She was afraid of whoever walked those steps. And in that instant, he knew the night was about to change everything. The sound of boots on wet pavement grew clearer, each step steady, unhurried. Like someone who already believed they owned the night. He tightened his grip on the broken pipe he had picked up earlier, the metal cold and slick in his hand. Positioned himself at the edge of the alley, his body tense, ready. The girl shrank back into the shadows with her dogs pressed around her, their low growls vibrating through the stillness. Then the figure appeared. It wasn't one man, it was two. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving side by side with the quiet confidence of predators. Their jackets were heavy, marked with stains and scars, and one of them carried a length of chain that clinked softly with each step. The other had something sharper, glinting in the faint light, perhaps a knife. They stopped at the mouth of the alley. Their eyes scanned the darkness until they landed on him. He stood firm, his silhouette outlined against the faint light behind him, blocking the way. Well, one of them drawled, his voice carrying an edge of amusement. Looks like someone's been keeping her warm. The other grinned, teeth sharp in the gloom. Thought she'd learned by now. Guess not. His eyes flicked past him to the girl. Behind him, he felt her shrink deeper into the shadows. The dogs barked, loud and vicious, but neither man flinched. They had heard those barks before, faced them, and kept coming. Leave her, he said, his voice low, steady. The first man laughed, a sound cold and cruel. And who are you? Some street rat thinking he's a hero. He stepped forward, the chain dragging across the ground with a metallic scrape. Move aside. Last warning. He didn't move. His grip tightened on the pipe, every muscle in his body braced. He had no illusions. These men were stronger, armed, and dangerous. But he also knew something they didn't. He wasn't just standing for himself. He was standing for her. For the girl who had whispered her first words to him. For the trust she had almost begun to show, and he wasn't about to let her lose that tonight. The second man smirked, flicking the knife in his hand. Fine, we'll do this the hard way. They came at him together. The world narrowed. Into motion, the swing of the chain, the flash of the blade, the surge of adrenaline that made his veins burn. He ducked low, the chain whistling above his head, and swung the pipe upward with all his strength. It cracked against the first man's wrist, sending the chain clattering to the ground. The man roared in pain. The second lunged, knife slashing. He twisted away, the blade grazing his arm, burning hot. He gritted his teeth and swung the pipe again. The impact ringing out as it struck bone. The dogs exploded forward then, snarling, snapping, their fury unleashed. They leapt at the wounded men, forcing them back with teeth and fury. One man stumbled, cursing, trying to shake them off. The other swung wildly, trying to drive the animals away. Call them off, one shouted, panic now leaking into his voice. But the girl didn't move. She stood frozen in the shadows, her eyes wide, watching everything unfold. Blood dripped down his arm. The pain sharp, but he stood tall, pipe still in his hand. Not tonight, he said, his voice a growl. The men faltered. the bravado draining from their faces. One of the dogs snapped so close that the knife was dropped to the ground. The chain lay forgotten in the mud, and then, with curses and shouts, the men turned and fled, limping into the night, their silhouettes swallowed by the rain-slicked streets. For a long moment, the only sound was heavy breathing, the hiss of his own lungs, the soft whine of the dogs, the faint drip of water from broken gutters. He leaned against the wall, blood soaking into his sleeve, his whole body trembling with exhaustion. The girl stepped forward, her shadow stretching toward him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. In her eyes, he saw at the first spark of something fragile and dangerous, trust, and he knew then that everything had just changed. The alley was quiet now, save for the faint patter of rain dripping from cracked pipes and broken rooftops. The metallic clang of the fallen chains still seemed to echo faintly in the night, and his arm throbbed with pain where the knife had cut him. He pressed his palm against the wound, feeling the warmth of his own blood seeping through his shirt. The girl stood only a few steps away, the dogs circling protectively around her, their growls fading into uneasy whines. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Her face was thin, pale beneath the grime of the city, and her eyes wide and unblinking seemed both terrified and strangely calm, like she had lived through too many nights like this before. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't running. She was studying him as though she didn't yet understand why he had stayed. "You're hurt," she finally said, her voice low, almost reluctant, as if speaking the words cost her something. He gave a faint shrug, trying to brush it off. "I've had worse." But when he shifted his arm, pain flared hot, sharp enough to make his breath catch. The girl's gaze flicked to the shadows at the far end of the alley, as if expecting the men to return. "They'll come back," she whispered. "They always do." Her words cut deeper than the wound. He realized with a sinking heaviness that this wasn't a single night of fear for her. It was a life cycle. People hunting her, hounding her, waiting for the right moment to drag her down. And every time she had run, hidden, fought to survive. "Another day, but not this time." "Then we won't be here when they do," he said. Her brow furrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. "You'll leave me too." "Everyone leaves." He shook his head, firm. "Not tonight. Come with me."
Ow!
The girl hesitated, her dogs pressing close against her legs, watching him with eyes that gleamed faintly in the dark. She clutched the tattered fabric of her sleeve, torn and dirty, as if unsure whether to step forward or retreat back into the shadows that had always sheltered her. Trust did not come easily to someone who had been abandoned so many times, but the memory of him standing against two armed men, refusing to move, refusing to surrender her, lingered in her mind. She had never seen anyone do that for her before. Slowly, carefully. She nodded. They slipped out of the alley together, the dogs padding silently alongside them. The streets were nearly empty, but the city itself felt alive, watching, whispering. Every dark corner seemed to hold a threat, every broken window seemed like an eye. He knew they couldn't wander aimlessly. They needed shelter, a place the men wouldn't find her. He guided her through twisting streets, past rusted fences and burned-out buildings, until they reached an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the district. Its massive doors sagged on their hinges, but the inside was dry. The concrete floor littered with dust and silence. The girl entered warily, scanning every shadow, every broken beam above. Her dogs sniffed the ground, tails stiff, ears perked. When they finally seemed to relax, she sank to the floor. Pulling her knees close to her chest, he sat across from her, tearing a strip of cloth from his already ruined shirt and wrapping it tightly around his wound. His hands shook slightly, but he forced them steady. When he looked up again, she was watching him. Not with fear anymore, but with something else. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "I know," he replied, "but I did." Her lips parted as if she wanted to say more, but instead, she leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. For the first time since he had met her, she looked tired, vulnerable, almost human. The silence between them stretched. But it wasn't empty. It was heavy, alive. filled with the weight of everything that had just happened, and everything that was coming, because she was right. The men would come back. And next time, they wouldn't be alone.